As a confidence coach in Calgary who works with businesses and individuals, I have seen that confidence looks different for everyone. In this podcast, we explore confidence through the eyes of our diverse community, redefining it one conversation at a time. Welcome to Confidence Redefined. I'm your host, Alyssa McMasters. Today, we sit down with Janine Rogan, CPA and a powerhouse in financial education and advocacy. As the founder and CEO of the Wealth Building Academy, she is on a mission to empower women to confidently grow their wealth through financial feminism. An award-winning CPA and accomplished keynote speaker, Janine has delivered impactful talks globally, including a TEDx stage, and has been featured in numerous international publications. In 2023, Janine published her debut book, The Pink Tax, Dismantling a Financial System Designed to Keep Women Broke, which became a #1 bestseller in feminist theory on Amazon. The book exposes the hidden financial barriers women face, from overpriced products to the motherhood penalty. A University of Alberta alumni, Janine hails from Edmonton, Canada, and now resides in Calgary with her husband Andrew, son Theodore, and their dog Laser. Welcome, Janine. Hi, Janine. How are you?
I'm so good. How are you?
I am so good. I'm so grateful that you're here to talk all about confidence. And let me tell you why I thought that you would be one of the perfect guests for this podcast. You have brought so much confidence to women when it comes to their financial literacy, when it comes to their own wealth. And I think it's a really important topic that we talk about in confidence, is talk about that money side of things, where generations before us were like, don't talk about it.
Yeah, no, it's really, really interesting. It was actually the 1960s when women could first open their own bank account without a co-signer of a husband or a father. So
repeat that, the 1960s.
1960s. So like my mom was alive then. It's only been one generation of women being financially autonomous. And it wasn't until the 70s that we could actually have our own mortgages.
That's
Wild.
insane to me.
Yeah.
You can have your own mortgages to 70. And then what's the actual date for credit cards?
That was in the 70s as well. It was 74.
Okay. And then there's something in the 90s. What was in the 90s?
Oh, I believe in the 90s it was getting your own business loan without a male co-signer. Yeah.
In the 90s.
In the 1990s.
And that's
like I was alive then.
I know. And it's something so interesting that we just don't talk about, and we just expect women who now have bank accounts and have mortgages, and a lot of women are now living on their own and doing their own thing. A lot of people are not having kids anymore as well. We're expecting these women to know how to build wealth and how to be confident in their wealth, but also not having a really great space to talk about it. And again, you can't just go to your parents to talk about it because they couldn't even have a bank account.
Exactly. We have not had really that many role models of financially independent women able to show us how to do it. And I mean, I believe that this is for a number of reasons, but women are also often told, like, don't talk about money, right? If you talk about money and you want money, you're greedy. But then if you marry a man who makes more money than you, well, you're a gold digger.
Yeah, let's talk about that a little bit. Why we're not allowed to talk about money. Let's get into it. Why do you think that is? Systematically, why do you think we're not supposed to talk about it?
I think with all of these things, it's always very complex. I think systemically, absolutely, we want to keep women financially reliant on men to keep the kind of the patriarchy going. And we don't want women to become wealthy, because then that takes away from that human giver syndrome the Nagasaki sisters talked about in the book Burnout, where women are basically just told to do things for free, to not charge, to give their labor and their mental wellness for free to their spouse, to their partners, to the business community. Do it out of the goodness of your heart, exposure, all of those things. And that keeps wealth out of women's hands. And ultimately, wealth means power, right? Power to make decisions, power to impact change, impact policy, and ultimately make your own choices on kind of like what kind of businesses you're investing in, or what kind of investments you hold, and what kind of impact you want to leave. So it is very complex, and and it's very nuanced, but I think it definitely stems from the patriarchal system that we're in.
Yeah. And when we talk about the finances, I know that you have clients of all different generations, all different ages, races, etc. What is the common themes that you're seeing coming up with your clients?
I think a lot of overwhelm in terms of not being confident, honestly, in making that next step. So I'll give you an example. I had a client who was going to be opening a TFSA and start investing, which is fantastic. That's a great first step. and got into this like analysis paralysis of where to open the TFSA. And it ultimately came down to the fact that it was okay, whatever she decided, because if she in 2 years didn't like that platform, you do have the ability to switch and move your money. So it's that analysis paralysis of, oh my God, I'm going to make the wrong decision, so I'm not going to make any decision at all.
And it feels so big. Why do you think your finances just feels like such like a daunting task? Do you have like a hypothesis of why it feels so daunting?
I think the financial industry does a disservice to women, but I also think there is a lot of complexity in the language that we use around money. There's 1 million acronyms, as you know, TFSA, RSP, RESP, all these acronyms. And so if you're coming into something that's basically a different language, it absolutely feels overwhelming. And I try to remind people that like, just like you would never go into the ER and expect to understand doctor lingo, all the, you know, things that doctors say, you would hopefully have a doctor that was able to kind of translate into normal people speak to understand what's going on with you. The same is true for your money. And so if you don't have someone that's able to help you do that, it absolutely can feel so overwhelming and so daunting.
Yeah, you had a summit last year that I was at, and it was wonderful. And something as simple as knowing that the R in RRSP stands for retirement and the E in RESP stands for education was something I didn't know. I literally was like, I just thought that they were acronyms for something else. And even something as simple as that helped me be like, oh, retirement, education, duh. Why do you think we aren't taught these things in school?
You know, a couple hypotheses is there. I think, honestly, sometimes we don't want to teach financial literacy because we don't want people to be able to do it themselves. And at the end of the day, we kind of have to know where the money is being made. And I know a lot of banks make a lot of money off of people not knowing what they're doing. So that's maybe the cynic in me. I think the optimist in me says we don't talk about it because it has been taboo for a long time, and we think it's, you know, crass if we talk about money. You know, don't talk about politics, don't talk about religion, don't talk about money, don't talk about sex. And I think not having it in our school systems is a huge problem, because you come out, you graduate, and it's like, okay, what do I do with calculating the volume of a cylinder? Like, if that's not your job, you're never going to use that.
The mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell, but
Absolutely.
I don't know what compounding interest is.
Exactly. And
real.
so I think that there's a big disconnect, honestly, in what we're teaching. And, you know, we are absolutely teaching skills and learning how to study, and that's so important. But I really think there's a space for a financial literacy course. Ontario actually just announced that they will be requiring a financial literacy course and exam, and you have to get a certain mark to get your diploma. So I think that's a fantastic step. I don't know if examination is the perfect solution, and you can talk to a teacher about that, because I'm definitely not a formally trained educator, but I think that it's a good first step, and it gets people talking about money and making it kind of normal in everyday life. I don't know if you've ever had a conversation with someone about pay, and it gets really awkward. People are like, well, like I get paid. And it's like, why can't we just say what we're paid?
How do you think people can build their confidence to say what they're getting paid? One thing that I've really loved is joining different user groups, specifically with lots of women who are very open about what salary they're making, so that you can understand exactly what kind of is in the market there. I think joining user groups, do you have any other advice for people who are wanting to increase their confidence around their finances?
Yeah, starting to talk about it with people you trust, I think, is really important. So maybe that's a group of friends, or maybe that's like joining a mastermind or joining a user group that is focused on that. Like, you know, both of us are part of the Toast community. And I know you had April on your podcast last season, and that's a really great space in kind of the tech incubator space, where we do talk openly about salaries. And I think, you know, I would say men have a responsibility to share what they're making with their female women counterparts, but also being two white women, we have kind of the unique opportunity to also do that for women of color, because we know that the pay gap is even bigger for anyone who has any level of intersectionality. So I think talking about it and normalizing it. Companies don't like that, because they don't want to have to pay everybody fairly, I guess. But I think it's really important that we do that. And, you know, I talk about this in my book, but I actually was training a man, and we were at the same level. He was brought in, and because of the conversation I had with him, I found out I was making $13,000 less than he was, and I was training him. And, I actually don't remember his name because he didn't stay with the company for very long, but I was able to take that information and then go and get a $15,000 raise. And so without, him having done that, I would still be making way less money and thinking that it was okay.
Let's talk about your book, The Pink Tax.
Yes.
And it talks all about how women are subjected to harder times when it comes to finances. One of them is called the pink tax. Let's talk about what that means to you.
Yeah, so the pink tax is actually a term coined in the 1990s, and it is the gendered pricing difference between two products. So walk into any pharmacy or, a grocery store that has a pharmacy aisle, and if you look at shavers, shampoo, lotion, all of those things, typically the kind of women's version will cost more. Or if they are priced the same, the women's version will have less volume, so less milliliters, less ounces. And so that can add up over a woman's lifetime to be over $180,000 that she is paying, because it extends into clothing, it extends into, I don't know if you've noticed it, my little one, he loves pink, but like kids' toys and helmets and clothing, the girls section is more expensive.
Isn't that wild? And we don't think about something like that because we just go in and we're like, okay, well, let's go get some razors or we'll go get whatever. And it's just kind of how it is. But why is that how it is? Why is that acceptable? How can we change that? Is it a policy thing or is it something that we can do individually?
I think it's both. TikTok and Instagram are really great for being able to capture those moments at those stores and in a video format and show the pricing difference. And I think calling those companies out is really important. And then I do think there's a place for legislation. We've seen California and New York both pass legislation to ban the pink tax. And there was actually a petition earlier this year. I think it's gone to Congress, but I don't think it has gone anywhere. But it was in Canada to kind of axe the pink tax and make it illegal for companies to, charge different amounts. Another really great example I actually came across was naproxen is a drug that's often marketed for period cramps. And there, it can be the exact same compound in two different drugs, but one has, for menstrual relief on the cover of it, and it's, $3 more.
Right. And let's even talk about menstrual products. The fact that they're not free and we have to pay for them. And I know a lot of people who are in the underprivileged community are choosing between food and period products.
Yeah, it's wild. It's like you don't bring your own toilet paper into a bathroom. So why are we expecting women to bring their own menstrual products? And I know there's going to be someone that's like, well, the women will just like steal all the products. And it's like, well, do you steal the toilet paper from the public bathroom?
And if you do, like, you might need it, actually.
Yeah, then
you know
go
what?
Right ahead.
If you need that more than public bathroom, then you take it. Thank you.
But yeah, like imagine, you get your period for the first time and you didn't have a parent or an adult figure telling you what's going on, and you're in junior high or high school, and what do? Like that can have so much shame and embarrassment. And I think, I don't think anything ever exists in a silo. And so confidence in something like that absolutely can extend into your ability to try something new or learn something new like money. And so if you don't have confidence in kind of all the other areas of your life, it can be, I think, really challenging to get into trying something new, learning this new thing around finances.
Yeah. And when we talk about confidence in other areas of our lives translating into our finance, what's an area that we can start working on our confidence that will also translate to our finances? From my mind, I think communication, like learning how to communicate your thoughts and your feelings outside of the bank will really help you when you're inside of that next bank.
Absolutely. I think, negotiation is one of my favorite topics to discuss. And I think negotiation is something that absolutely can impact your finances. Fotini, who was at the summit, actually, she was one of the speakers. She thinks she's going to be able to retire almost 20 years earlier because she has been able to negotiate. And on average, people will retire 8 years earlier if they're able to negotiate. And so that doesn't necessarily have to even be your salary, because that can be a really overwhelming and stressful one to start with. It can be little things, right? It can be asking for more vacation days or flexibility to work from home, or it can be negotiating a phone bill. getting more data, not even paying less, just getting better internet or more data available to you. And those little things, those little experiences that you have where you're advocating for yourself absolutely make you more confident, so that when you go into the bank and you might have an advisor talking in what feels like a different language, you have the confidence to be like, hey, I actually don't know what you're saying. Can you please like kind of meet me where I'm at and explain this to me, because I also have a right to know what's going on with my money.
Yeah. And this podcast is called Confidence Redefined, because confidence means something so different to everyone. And I love what you just said. Confidence might mean you're getting up on stage, you're having fun. It might mean you're going on a date. And it also might mean saying, I don't know what you're talking about. Right? That
Absolutely.
can be a really scary thing to say. So finding what kind of your own confidence looks like and then translating it in. Something else I want to touch on that I loved is when you said, Fatini said she's going to retire 20 years earlier. Money is such a construct, especially because we don't have it in our hands anymore, right? We have it like a bank account. We have it in investments, whatever you're doing with it. Talking about how many years earlier you're going to retire is like a little bit more concrete to be like, holy, that is a huge difference from rather than being like, oh, I'm going to make 100K more a year or 20K more a year. Actually, like how that translates to your life is so wonderful. Do you have any advice for people who are kind of trying to figure out how to translate money into their own lives and how they can kind of translate in their mind what money could actually mean to them? Like you said, power, you said retirement, freedom.
Yeah. And I teach a lot of this, but a really high level example is understanding that $1 today could be worth 17 in retirement. That's big. If you learn to invest, you can take $1 and turn it into 17. Like, sign me up. And I think, that really, when we start to do some of those calculations of, okay, I have $100,000, what does that turn into in 30, 35 years? Then I think we see like, wow, look at the freedom that I could have with that, or look at the choices I could make to maybe take a job that I'm really passionate about but pays less, or take time to take a rest, take a sabbatical. I've been seeing a lot of that lately. Travel the world for a year, spend time with my kids, work 3 days a week. Like, I think it gives us so much flexibility. And I think when we start to put it into kind of concrete life terms as opposed to just dollars and cents, it really becomes something that I think people can lean into and, really desire and want in their life. And, I run a decent number of masterminds, and one of the things we always talk about is, what does your rich life look like? Because we've been sold a narrative where it's like, go to school, find a partner, get married, buy a house, have kids, get a dog, have another kid. And that's great if that's what you want, but that's not always the case. You said it at the beginning. There's lots of women that have decided to have kids by themselves or, not have kids at all. And so I think we need to be able to allow women to have that independence with their lives. And we do that through using the tool that is money.
And I love how you say that in almost everything that you do is that money is a tool. It's not something that is here for us to make us feel better or makes us bigger than the person beside us. It's actually a tool that we can use just like any other tool. We talked about the pink tax. I want to go back and talk about some other things that make it harder for women to be wealthy. Let's talk about the wage gap. What does that look like for you and your clients?
Yeah, it's a lot. How much time do you have?
Let's go.
Yeah. So the wage gap is kind of where it all starts, right? We know women are paid less than men. In Canada, it's sitting at about 89 cents to the dollar for white women. As soon as we add any level of intersectionality, whether that be race, whether that be sexual orientation, neurodivergence, the wage gap just gets bigger. We know women of color are sitting at about 62 cents on the dollar, which is really unfortunate. And so we make less money. And then we have to pay for things that are more expensive because the pink tax comes in. And we also, that's not even including things that we pay for that men don't, right? Makeup in general, menstrual products, again, in general. And so that really means we have less money to save and invest. And that's ultimately what leads to the wealth gap. And the wealth gap, white women have 30% of the worldwide wealth and women of color have just 2%. So there's a big difference between the wealth that women are accumulating versus men. And, that's not even taking into account like the motherhood penalty. Any time you take away from the workforce to have kids, it just continues to perpetuate. And there's all these things that women experience that impact their ability to earn and ultimately means that they have less money.
Yeah, another interesting one that I've heard you talk about is the sleep gap, how women actually end up sleeping less than men too, which is just so interesting. So there really is like 20 things that are all kind of working together to make women less wealthy. What rebuttal do you have for the typical conversation that you're going to hear as well? Women want to go have babies. They don't want to stay home. They don't want to go back to work. And the reason why there's a pay gap is because, women have different jobs. It's actually not apples to apples. What's the rebuttal?
Oh yeah, you should see my TikTok comments. Like, it's all this stuff. I think we can't simplify things too much. And I think sometimes we get into that where it's like, well, look, they're in different jobs. And it's like, okay, but we have to look at equal pay for equal work of value. So what value is that role providing? Because there seems to always be budget for firefighters and police officers to be paid more, but there never seems to be any budget for educators and for nurses to be paid more. And I would argue a nurse is just as important as a firefighter. And I think anyone who is a parent in the pandemic knows that teachers are crucial parts of our society. And so I think when we look at that, that's really important. There's a ton of data that shows us that when women come into certain workforces, like certain industries, the pay actually drops. So the original software engineers were actually women. If you've seen the movie Hidden Figures, you'll know it was women of color. And they were not very well respected and not paid well. And now when we look at who are our software engineers, it's usually kind of like white dudes in Silicon Valley making multiple six figures. And kind of the same was true for school teachers about 100 plus years ago. Men were actually the community teachers, and they were well respected, they were paid well, and then women started coming into the profession, and we've seen a decline. And we're actually seeing it now in medicine. In pediatrics, there's an influx of women into that type of medicine, and we're seeing that they're the lowest paid doctors out of kind of all of the specialties. So I think there is something systemic here where it's like we don't value women's work equally to traditionally men's work.
Yeah. And now we talk about women. How does this also negatively affect men? Because I think a lot of men are like, okay, well, it's a woman's problem. But at the end of the day, I think it's a society problem. How do you think it also affects men negatively?
Oh, it absolutely is. First of all, if your partner decides to stay home or you've made the decision as a family to stay home, that's an immense financial pressure on one person. And if they were to lose their job or, things weren't going well at work, that's super, super stressful. And I think also when only women take time away from the workforce for the children, I'm obviously a big advocate of men taking parental leave. Men don't get to connect with their kids as much, and we see higher rates of suicide, death by suicide, in kind of men aged 30 to 60. And a lot of that can be attributed to not really having those relationships with their family and their children, and work becomes their entire identity. And I'm not sure if you've had anyone in your life lose their job, but when your entire identity is your job and you lose it, that can be incredibly detrimental to your mental health. So, making those relationships with your family and your children is so, so important for men. And I think when women are involved in the money and women have money, we can create systems that are more supportive to everyone in society and get men more involved in their families as well.
Yeah, and men having to be the provider. We go back to the patriarchy as also telling men that they're not allowed to have feelings, not allowed to have emotions. They have to be the provider. That is an immense amount of stress. And if we could take that stress off and share it across the community a little more, it's going to help men, it's going to help women, it's going to help everyone.
And we're going to raise more well-adjusted children to society. If they have both parents involved and they see, oh, mom cries, dad cries, I can cry, that's really positive, because we want people that can deal with their emotions in our society that don't just like pent up and then lash out, right? Like that's how we get lots of violence and challenges there.
Yeah. I want to talk about you. Let's talk about how you decided that this was the niche of the financial area that you wanted to go into.
Yeah, so I've been interested in personal finance for about 14 years, which does make me feel a little bit old. But I started university actually in the Faculty of Engineering. I was really good at math in high school, so someone was like, go into engineering. Not for me. I did one semester and I was like, I can't handle this. This is way too much, not what I want, and definitely not the career path I want. And from there, I ended up jumping through a number of different faculties and ended up in business. And as I was kind of doing my business degree in accounting, I really started to fall in love with the money side of things. So I actually took a human ecology class on personal finance, and we had to do like a book report on, I think it was a compound interest book. I can't remember the name. Automatic Millionaire was the first personal finance book I read. And this notion of compound interest to me was just like, whoa, I can make my money work for me. This is insane. Like, how does nobody know this? And so as I was doing my accounting degree and then ultimately my CPA designation, I was really finding the spaces I was in. I was, auditing some of the biggest companies in Canada, and I was telling businesses how to run their finances, but nobody was telling us as the CPAs how to manage their money. And I remember coming across a manager at that time, this was probably about 10 years ago, who had like $40,000 sitting in cash in his TFSA. And I was like, what are you doing? But he didn't know. Mm-hmm. And so I started, I remember I came across this actually the other day in my old Google Drive, but it was like financial literacy for the tax associate. Like I was teaching people at work how to invest. And so that kind of translated into workshops and writing for a number of online publications across Canada. And then the pandemic hit. And I knew that I needed to kind of start a business / pivot what I was doing. And that's really where I started my investment course. So I teach women how to invest. And around that time is also when I started doing research for my book. And I was really sick of, in the personal finance community, unfortunately, it was a lot of white dudes being like, the reason women don't have wealth is because they buy too many lattes, or avocado toast is why our generation can't buy houses. And I was like, that can't be it. Like if that was it, we would have solved it by now. So that's really what led me down the rabbit hole of trying to understand all of the systemic barriers women face when it comes to building wealth. And that's where the book was born out of. And that's ultimately where the mission and vision of my company have kind of stemmed from, is thinking that like that's kind of, and we need to actually understand what's holding women back.
Yeah. Now you've had hundreds of people that you've worked with, thousands maybe?
Probably thousands.
Probably thousands
in
at this
terms
point.
of like who I've spoken to. Yeah, probably thousands.
Where do we start? Let's say I have absolutely no idea what to do with my finances, and actually I'm kind of sitting in a place where I might have some debt. I also I'm afraid to look at my bank account.
Yeah, we definitely can't have that head in the sand approach. I know it can be easy now, but it will hurt you long term. And I think a lot of women, usually they're a little bit like not later in their career, but in their 30s or 40s, are stressed that they haven't started yet. And so they kind of, again, get into that analysis paralysis of like, I don't know which decision to make, so I'm not going to make any decision. But the truth is you actually only need to make one right decision, right? You just have to take that next step. You don't have to do it all in one day. And so when people are starting out, and I'll make sure that this is available for people, but I have a checklist of 30 things you can do. And 30 things to fix your finances. And I say, just pick one for the next month. And then the month after that, pick another one. And it sounds so simple, but by the time you get to the end of the year, you'll have done 12 right things, and you'll be in a vastly different space financially. And I think that's the biggest thing that's to overcome, is like, just get started. There's that Chinese proverb that says like the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. Second best time is today. Same is true for investing and managing your money. We can't change what's in the past, but now we know better, so we can absolutely do better. And I think with that, I would say like, give yourself some grace, because it is like learning a new language. You wouldn't expect yourself to be fluent in French tomorrow if you were starting to learn it. It takes time to understand, and there is a lot of financial jargon. So I would also say find someone you can trust. And, that could be someone like an online influencer like myself. It might be a financial advisor, but with banks and financial advisors, I would just say understand how they're being compensated, so that we can understand bias. Because oftentimes they'll be selling an investment that maybe isn't right for you or has super high fees, and they're doing it because they get more commission. And that's nothing against financial advisors. Same is true for realtors, right? They want you to buy a more expensive house so they get a bigger cut. Not to say you can't use them, just understand their bias.
Beautiful. Something you said in there I love, and it was the next best step. right? Sometimes we get so stuck with the analysis paralysis. We want to make like a huge change and we want to do everything all at once. And that's also with my confidence coaching. What that looks like is those tiny, tiny things that feel small add up to being a lot, right? So we're definitely going to put those 30 checklist things and you can kind of pick off what you do there. So we kind of talked about what we can do to kind of get started. Out of those 30, what's your favorite?
I mean, I'm a big advocate of investing. Like, I think that's one of the ways we close the wealth gap kind of individually, right? Like, of course, there's policy that needs to be put through. There's lots of changes in the financial industry. I would like to see, obviously, financial literacy in schools. But individually, I would say negotiation and investing are your two kind of best things that you can do for yourself long term. And so I also tell people that you don't have to be like a millionaire to start investing. There's this like preconceived notion that you need like hundreds of thousands of dollars to get started in investing. When I started investing, I was 19 and I put $25 into my RSP. So you can start with as little as that. And at that point, yes, the $25 doesn't really do anything. It might move a little bit, but it's building that habit. So if it's $25 every week or every month, maybe then in 6 months you increase it to 50, and then you get a raise at work and you increase it to 100, and it starts to build and you start to get those returns. And all of a sudden you're sitting on a 5 or a 6 figure portfolio, and that can really set you up financially for the long term. And we call that, we've had this conversation, call that coast fire. So if you can front load your retirement and save and invest enough at the beginning, then you kind of can just coast all the way to retirement without actually needing to contribute again. And sometimes that's in like the most expensive years of your life, like having kids, buying houses, buying cars. I mean, I know it's so expensive. And so sometimes we do have to take a step back from those investing goals, and that can be momentarily, but if you've set yourself up, you really don't have to worry about it long term.
Beautiful. Investing. I love it.
I know it sounds simple, but it can be overwhelming. And so, even just setting up an automatic transfer into a savings account as a pretend investing account while you're learning is a great, again, way to build that habit.
So now we talked a little bit about, turning into motherhood. When you became a mom, how did your view on finances change, or did it?
Oh, I think I didn't realize how expensive kids were. Like I definitely knew, but I didn't know. And I didn't know that, I'm sure you feel this. I'm like, we'll be at the store and he'll be like, I want that. And I'm like, sure. Like, I'm just such
You're
a
like,
pushover.
oh, of course.
Yeah. I'm like, you want it? Of course, honey. Like, and we're in a very privileged spot to be able to do that. So I'm grateful for that. But, I was still in the corporate world when I was on mat leave, and as hard as I tried, and I tried really, really hard, I was actually passed over for a promotion 3 times. Once I told them I was pregnant while I was on mat leave, and then right when I came back. And ultimately one of the decisions that made me leave the company. But I think it sucked that it was happening to me, and I felt like I was someone who knew what was happening and had the awareness kind of beforehand, and it still happened. And so that really made me kind of even more of an advocate for, promotions and plans while we're on mat leave, and mat leave not impacting women's ability to earn long term. And I think also negotiating really hard for those raises and educating companies on the fact that like mat leave is not a vacation, right? We're not coming back from a break. The baby basically hasn't slept for a year unless you have like a dream sleeper of a baby, right? And so there also needs to be programs and systems put in place when women return to work to support them and make sure that they are able to kind of be at the same levels as their male counterparts, where the motherhood penalty kind of doesn't impact them.
Yeah, and it is so systemic. There's so many things that we need to change policy-wise, company-wise. But I want to talk a little bit about what we can do individually, both men and women, to help increase their wealth. The first thing is, this is a question that I'm asked a lot too. How do I go in and ask for a raise when I know I deserve one without going, okay, no worries, when they say no?
Yeah. And again, I'll plug Fotini. Definitely check out her book. She has so many negotiation tips in there. But I think coming with all your research is important. So have comparables for different companies. Understand what other people are making in your firm or company. And this can be a conversation where you do understand the actual dollar amount or the kind of the range that they were in. One of the questions I like to ask is, when you were at this level, what was an appropriate range for this work? So kind of asking more open-ended questions. And then I think you go in and you say, like, how do we make this work so it's sustainable for both of us? Because it is expensive for companies to lose people, right? To rehire, retrain, etc. So if you can show your value and show the comparables that you've done your research, you're showing all of the amazing things you've done in the year, I think you can, really have a great case for it. And if your manager says no, instead of saying no worries, I think it's important to put it back on them and be like, okay, so what's the plan to get to, this salary, or how are we going to demonstrate that I deserve this? Because if you're not getting support from your manager or your coach or whoever it is, I think it's time to look for another company.
Yeah. Now, here's something that I also get from a lot of my clients is my mom or my dad says that I'm supposed to be loyal and stay at a company for 40 years, and that's how I'm going to be wealthy.
Did you catch the eye roll?
I did. And I think a lot of my clients are like, well, I probably should stay because I want to look loyal. What's kind of the average time people are staying at jobs right now?
I think obviously the pandemic kind of threw things for a loop, but honestly, 2 to 3 years, maybe 5. And I think we also have to realize, kind of in the big grand scheme of things, the way our generations are going to build wealth is very different than our parents' generation, right? Real estate was cheap for our parents. If you ask your grandparents, which they paid more for, their first house or their most recent car, it will most likely be their most recent car. And I think the boomer generation and the generations before that, and even a little bit Gen X, saw a huge increase in real estate. And that was a really great investment for them. Times are different now, though. And I think, that it's in housing, but that extends into the workforce too. I think oftentimes companies, aren't making policies that are supportive of people. Yeah, yes, we can be loyal, but back then there was also pensions that were attached to those things. Whereas now most people have to self-fund their retirement. So yes, maybe being loyal and getting that golden pension made sense back then. And if you did, put your head down and work hard, you would get recognized and promoted, but that's really not the way things are.
And I think it's important to acknowledge that things are changing and things have changed, and we just can't live the same lives, including something that you've talked about is we can't live the same lifestyles. We can't expect ourselves to live the lifestyles of our parents who were able to get a house for 20% of their income and kind of be able to have a secondary condo or a cabin somewhere. Often we can't live that same lifestyle, and asking ourselves to kind of compare to that can be really detrimental to our confidence.
Absolutely. And I think in Canada especially, we have this obsession with home ownership. Home ownership is the way to success. And I don't think that necessarily has to be the case, right? There's nothing wrong with renting. And oftentimes in a lot of scenarios, you'll be better off financially if you rent and invest kind of the difference as opposed to being a homeowner. And there's a lot of reasons to be a homeowner, emotional reasons. Maybe you want a place where you can customize it. You want to have a place where you're not going to be evicted, or you have your kid grow up in a certain neighborhood where they have friends in the school and all that. And those are all great reasons, but it is very expensive to be a homeowner. And, I say this a lot to my clients is your house is not a retirement plan. If something bad happens, you can't cut a window or a door or the fridge and sell it. I mean, I guess you could sell your fridge, but then you wouldn't have a place to put your food. But you can't sell those things to kind of fund an emergency, where an emergency fund will do that for you, obviously. If you have investments in the stock market, it is a lot easier to sell them. They're more liquid than something like a house. So we have to make sure we're also kind of diversified across asset classes. And I don't think previous generations had to do that as much. Of course they did, and lots of them did invest in the stock market, and that's great. But I think we have to be really mindful that, again, we don't live in the same set of circumstances as our parents. And that's, again, not to say one generation had it harder than the other, because I know sometimes the boomers come at me and it was 17% interest or whatever. But I think it's really important to understand that it's different, and we're going to build wealth in a different way, and that's okay too.
And I see a lot of my clients losing a lot of confidence because they're like, I don't have a house. You know, I'm 30, I want to own a house. Or I'm 40, I want to have a house. And I love that you say things just look different and our goals can be different too. And I often think that confidence really starts with finding what your own values are, figuring out what you value, but also finding your own goals that aren't tied to other people's expectations of who you should be. Do you have any advice on setting financial goals for yourself and how you can figure out what your rich life looks like?
Yeah, and I love what you hit on there is values are such an important place to start, and they're going to be different for every single person, right? So I kind of go to the example of what your values are. Your spending has to be reflective of those. So, you know, back in my corporate day when I would go downtown 5 days a week, you know, sometimes I just wouldn't pack a lunch. And this is a fun little silly example, but I think it illustrates the point. And lunch always downtown ended up being like 15 to 20 bucks, which, you know, over the course of a month adds up. And the food was never that good, right? Like you go to like Marcello's or Sunterra and you get like this chicken that's been sitting there for 4 hours and it's okay. And I was like, over the course of the month, has this really impacted my life in a positive way? Has it added value? Or could I take that $400 or $200 and go out for a really nice dinner with my husband and buy a very expensive bottle of wine? And I think that's going to give me more value. So I'm going to, you know, meal prep and pack my lunch. And I think when we kind of boil it down to things like that and looking kind of like the top categories you're spending in, what are you spending your money on? And of course, sometimes convenience, especially as a mom, is worth something. But if your spending is not in alignment with your value, you're not going to be happy. And I see a lot of people that just buy things because we've been told that these are the things you have to buy, and it doesn't add to their happiness. So getting really clear on what your values are. If you love travel and you want to travel for 4 months or 5 months of the year, why are you owning a home? Rent something, or, you know, figure out an Airbnb situation to find a way to make an additional source of income. I think there's really creative ways we can live a life that's in alignment with our values, which ultimately is going to be our rich life, and do it in maybe a different way than the person sitting next to us. And that's okay too.
Yeah. And when Kevin O'Leary said like, just make your coffee at home and that's how I invested everything. Some people really love going out to Starbucks and that makes their day. And that's okay too.
Absolutely. I love grabbing a latte and it adds so much joy to my life. And I think, you know, we've seen the math. Like if you don't buy a latte every day, you get like $1,200 at the end of the year. And that's nowhere near enough money for a down payment on a house, right? Like, again, times were different back when Kevin O'Leary was, you know, buying lattes. I doubt he was buying lattes. He was probably buying a black coffee from like McDonald's or Tim Hortons. But if that is something that brings you joy, if buying your lunch at work gives you joy because you don't like cooking or you don't like meal prep and the kind of costs outweigh or the benefits outweigh the costs, then absolutely spend your money on that. I'm not here to tell anyone how to spend their money. If a Louis Vuitton bag is what brings you joy as opposed to a trip to California, then do that. Like we don't have to have the same goals and we don't have to have the same values as the person sitting next to us. And I want to give people permission to spend money on what's important to them, because at the end of the day, you're the only person that has to look in the mirror at yourself and be okay with the choices you've made.
Yeah. Now, I often, when I'm on TikTok or Reels, I see all these like financial people, mostly dudes, being like, all you got to do is buy a house and then you got to sell the house and get another house. And it can be really overwhelming. And then also the other side of like, if you just, you know, start flipping all your furniture and doing this, then you'll be wealthy. How do you feel like yourself? Like, how do you differentiate who you like want to follow versus like who is going to make you just kind of feel inadequate?
Yeah, I think if you're following someone that makes you feel inadequate, that's an immediate unfollow for me. I don't have time for that in my life, but I think a lot of those kind of, if I can generalize, those white dudes often have someone at home who is doing all the kind of cognitive and domestic labor, the mental load. And so they're able to just get up at 5 a.m. and go to the gym and then meal prep and do all these things. If they have kids, it's because their partner is taking care of them. So I think especially in motherhood, it's not always realistic to have 10 side hustles because you're exhausted at the end of the day. And so if you're in those years where, I mean, we both have toddlers, and my God, are they exhausting. We love them to death, but do they take so much of our energy? It's okay to pay for convenience, and it's okay to, you know, take a step back when you're in those daycare years that are so expensive from, maybe you're not contributing $500 a month to your retirement. Maybe you're only able to do $200, and that's okay for a period of time as well.
Yeah. And I also find there was this really interesting hustle culture that we had. I feel like it's decreasing a little bit, but where everything needed to be a side hustle. If you liked crochet, you had to sell it. You had to make money from it. If you liked social media, had to make money from it. I also want to give permission that you're allowed to do hobbies just because you like them. They don't have to make you money.
I saw this meme the other day and I sent it to my sister because it's so true. And it's like, okay, I'm just going to rest today. And then it's like me 5 minutes later. And it's like, is there a way to rest more productively? It's like, we have to give ourselves permission to rest. Like we don't need to work hard to be able to earn rest or sleep, going back to the sleep gap. Like it is crucial and critical for us to have leisure time and we show up as better people in our lives. I mean, again, here's the cynic in me that I think some of that hustle culture is perpetuating, needing to always be working to be able to afford things and kind of keep us as like a cog in the machine of capitalism. And if you start going down kind of that rabbit hole, you'll see like, how we build our societies, is that the best way? And, are the markers that we use for economic growth the right ones? And I mean, I would argue no. I think we should put people at the center of how we build an economy. And I think people should have leisure time and be able to work less. In Calgary specifically, there's a ton of companies that are demanding people be 5 days a week back in office, which costs people more because commute time, parking, lunch, all of those things. And then they have to sit at their desks for, 8.5 hours and they have to take a 1 hour lunch break. And it's like, why are we taking flexibility away from people? And again, I think sometimes it's kind of that hustle culture, bums in seats to make sure you're working really, really hard for the 8.5 hours a day. And it's like, okay, if the work's not getting done, that's a different conversation. But, why are we putting this on people when we've seen that remote work, flexible work gives predominantly parents more time back, which I think we all deserve because we've seen productivity increases in our technology. So why are we not reaping that reward as individuals in our society?
Yeah. Something that has been a big topic for a lot of people is inflation and how things are just feel so much more expensive. I saw one TikTok again. People always laugh, like, where did you read that article? I'm like, the TikTok Express, actually, where this guy found that you could reorder your Walmart order like from years ago. And it was from like 2022. And it was almost double the amount, the exact same order. He just reordered it. And it was pretty shocking.
Wow.
Just how the actual comparison.
Well, and we haven't seen wages go up.
We haven't seen wages go up. So how can people maintain their financial confidence with all of this inflation that feels so daunting?
I think, first of all, acknowledging that it is daunting and that it's impacting a lot of people. And I think then, getting smart around negotiating is a way that we can keep more money in our hands. So can we negotiate our phone bill? Like I said, there is like a part of the business that is customer retention. So can we get more data, like I said, or pay less? I'm a big advocate of always asking if there's a sale or a promotion that someone can add to my checkout if I'm, at a clothing store or whatever. And sometimes there is, and sometimes there's not, and that's okay too. But I think, asking for the things that you need and practicing that negotiating skill is a really good way to do that. There's also apps where you can find food that's, close to expiry and that can be marked down, so that there are ways also to spend less. I'm a big advocate of trying to earn more because I don't like to cut my spending because I like the lifestyle I live. But again, sometimes we can also remember that things are temporary. So if we're on a mat leave or on a study leave or things just feel really expensive, we can say to ourselves like, okay, this is temporary and things will change. Going through your subscriptions is a really good one. And again, it's not to say like I can never have this subscription again. It's just not right now. And I think that is a good mindset to have when it comes to trying to kind of make all the financial pieces work.
Beautiful. I want to go back to you personally. What is the best piece of advice you've gotten around your confidence?
Ooh, that's a good question. Around my confidence. I don't know, because I feel like, and maybe it'll come to me, but I feel like everyone struggles with confidence. Like, I get up on stages across the country and across the world, and, there are days as an entrepreneur where I'm like, oh my God, everybody hates me and nobody's going to buy from me and my business is going to fail. And then it's reminding myself that that's not true. And then having people in my corner to say like, no, like that's also not true. Like, look at all the amazing things you've done. But I think, one of the best things I've heard is like, if you don't ask, the answer is always no. And I've really taken that as some big, bold moves where I've just asked for things and they've kind of ended up working out. And I've been really fortunate in that. And I think that those choices to ask without or with fear, but hiding the fear of no has really allowed me to propel my career forward, right? I started speaking to high school students for a not-for-profit here in Alberta around money while I was in university. And I think that led to me getting the tech job I did where I got to present to CFOs and CEOs kind of all day and made some amazing connections there. And if I, hadn't reached out to the publisher that I really wanted to work with, just kind of on a whim, I probably wouldn't have the book I have today. And so I think, again, just being able to ask for things. And if the answer is no, that's okay too.
There is this like really fun exercise that I like to do. If you feel good, if at any point this feels like you want to throw up, don't do it. Of doing little things to purposely get rejected. Like going to order a coffee at Tim Hortons and asking for a free donut. They're probably going to say no, but maybe they won't. Just to kind of start getting used to asking for things and feeling that like no, and allowing yourself to kind of sit in that. So you can try it, but also if you're sitting here and your body just went, don't do it, okay? Listen to me.
Well, but like another really low stakes one where you don't actually need to like maybe interact with people, like, because then you have to drive up to the window afterwards, right?
Yeah,
Which is
exactly.
the stressful part. But if you're on the phone with Rogers or TELUS trying to negotiate and they say no, you can just hang up and call back later and try a different person. Like
our director literally just went, But for real, right? We don't have to appease people. And by doing these little things that allow us to just feel that rejection, it's going to get easier every single time. So when you're asking for the $15K increase for your salary, it's going to feel a little bit easier. Do you have any other tools that you use to increase your confidence? Specifically, let's talk about when you're like, my company's going to fail. No one likes me. No one's going to order from me. What do you do?
I try to always bring the facts to the conversation. Like, look at all the people that have, purchased from me in the past and come through my programs and the testimonials. April, who was on your podcast, she always talks about a hype folder. So screenshotting, anytime you get some great feedback. So I've tried to implement that. But I have a mantra where I tell myself like, and mantras can work for people. Obviously, if you're in certain socioeconomic classes, not always the case. But the one I like to use is like, I will always have the ability to earn more money. And that kind of like resets my nervous system. Like, okay, there is more money out there and I can go get it.
And something I love about that is that it's neutral. I work a lot of like with neutrality. So rather than saying I'm the richest person in the world, which is like that affirmation side of things, which sounds really nice, but then we just like don't believe it, right?
Well, and you're probably not going to be the richest person.
Exactly. And we start kind of feeling bad that we're not there. Focusing on I could always make more money. That's true. There's no like untruth in that.
Yeah.
So finding a mantra or an affirmation of sorts that just feels true to you can be a really big change, rather than focusing on something and telling yourself something that just like isn't going to come true.
Totally. And, I love that you brought in neutrality, because that is ultimately where I try to get people at with money, right? Like, debt is not bad. It's neutral. Money is a tool.
Say that again. I think people need to hear that.
Debt is not bad. It is neutral and a tool that can be used. I think this goes into like the whole capitalism side of things again, but any billionaire, Jeff Bezos, any of those guys, like the debt they have for their company is called leverage. So if you're using debt, and I'm not saying like go out and rack up credit card debt tomorrow, please don't do that. Please don't get a payday loan. But like if you're using debt to invest in a business, buy a house, like a mortgage, those are assets and those are investments that you can sometimes write the interest off for. But I think people need a reframe sometimes on, oh my God, I just need to get rid of my mortgage debt and I'll be fine. It's like, no, it's okay to have that. Yes, there's a cost to it, but again, we're neutral on it.
Yeah. And even using some of that credit card, if something happens and you lose your job, and it's still leveraging, I love that, leveraging it to be able to survive and get through it, because eventually you will always be able to make more money.
Absolutely. So it all comes full circle, and we just really try and keep it as neutral as possible. Money is a tool. It is not good or bad. That's it.
Yeah. What is the worst piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh, I've received a lot of bad advice. I would say there's a lot of people on the internet that talk about taxes that don't know what they're talking about. But I think one of the worst pieces of advice is just focusing on paying down debt without actually investing and building your wealth in addition to that. And so I always say, like, if you have $1,000 every month, let's say, to put towards debt and investing, if you have a lot of high interest debt, maybe 80% goes to debt repayment and 20% goes to investing. And those percentages can change over time depending on your goals. And I think that that's important, so that when your debt is gone, you have assets that are already built up. You're not starting from zero. So I'd say that's probably a bad piece of advice. And then I think the like unsustainable piece of like, just eat mac and cheese every day and save all your money and don't spend anything and don't enjoy your life at all is a terrible piece of advice, and happens in the personal finance community, where people are just obsessed with being cheap and frugal. And I think it has a place, but it's not sustainable long term. Your health can be impacted. Like if you're eating I think there was a college kid, they got scurvy. Like, go eat a grape.
The pirate's disease.
Right? Like, I don't know, get some vitamin C. But, you know, it's that obsession. And I'm not trying to make fun of that person. Like, probably their financial circumstances only allowed them to buy that. But there are people in the personal finance community who will say, like, at all costs, save as much money as possible. And it's like, no, I think we all have to put our health first. And, you know, also we're not promised tomorrow. So we also have to enjoy our money and what we've worked so hard to earn. And I think that there's finding that balance, right? And that's kind of my approach to money is what is that balance, right? We don't want to spend all of our money tomorrow. We need to save some for the future, but also how do we build a life that we don't need a break from?
Yeah. This is why I love talking about wealth with you, because it just feels very approachable and it feels very realistic. I think a lot of times I talk about wealth, it does feel all or nothing, and we only talk about like the actual dollars and cents. We don't talk about the things that it can do for us. And we also don't talk about, at the end of the day, like we still want to live like humans and have like a really beautiful, rich life, whether that means wealthy, and kind of having that nice balance there.
Yeah, you know, I don't think anyone gets to the end of their life and is like, man, I just wish I had stayed at the office longer and made more money, or I wish I had, you know, not paid for that gym membership, and, you know, I wish I had eaten worse. I think most people's regrets are, I wish I had spent more time with my family. I wish I had taken the trip. I wish I had, you know, gone back to school and done the thing that I'm passionate about. So, you know, my approach is, let's figure out those things that you want to do, and how do we use our money to basically be able to afford them. And usually it's through investing. Usually it's through building your wealth so that you have the choice to do that.
Yeah. So Janine, you're also very public on social media. You can find you on Instagram, LinkedIn, etc. How do you manage the idea in like a very male-dominated industry, the idea that you might be bossy, you might be, you know, different from what the white men are looking for in finance?
I mean, I've been called all the B words before. And it's not really an event I speak at if I don't have usually an older white dude come up to me after the fact to tell me something I did wrong or said wrong. And I think I've always been in spaces that are male dominated. So like my engineering class, I was one of 3 women in 2009. How old am I? Yeah, 2009. I was one of 3 in my engineering class. And then, you know, accounting is very male dominated, and then tech is very male dominated. And in most rooms I go into, I look quite a bit younger, maybe not now that I've had a kid, but I've looked quite a bit younger than what I actually was. And, you know, I'd be the expert in the room, and people would think I was like there to take notes. And I think, again, it's through practice and maybe getting a little bit pissed off and calling it out. You'll also probably be called other words when you do that. But maybe it's my audacity. I don't know. I'm pretty tenacious. I don't really like to take no for an answer, and will continue to fight something if I believe it is unjust. And I think that has helped with my confidence, and also trying to remember that, you know, I'm also doing it for the woman that's coming up behind me or my kid or someone else's kid, because there are so many times where I could be like, oh, I'll just ignore this comment, or I'll just, you know, not worry about the promotion I was passed over for. And I'm like, okay, but like, what about the next woman coming up? And what about if I have a daughter, or if my friends have a daughter? How do I, you know, make this better for them, or educate this person on what they're doing? So I guess I do get some hate from usually the white men when I speak or when I post on TikTok. And I think it's just, again, being able to not let it bother you.
Something I love is taking yourself out of the equation and thinking about the next person coming up can be really helpful to not personalize it as much.
Totally.
This isn't actually about me. This is about the system. And this is about me changing the system. Can be really helpful to kind of take yourself and your own emotions out of it and realize that you're going to help society as a whole.
Absolutely. And you know, actually, that's one of the best pieces of speaking advice I ever got was if you can, because people always get nervous before they go on stage. And I also grew up as a competitive dancer, so I think that probably helps with it too. But if you can make it about the audience and not about yourself and what the audience can gain from the knowledge you're about to share, the stress level comes way down, right? Because if you mess up a word, you mess up a word, and nobody's gonna, you know, hold your feet to the fire for that. If you can, again, kind of make it about not yourself, it really, I think, helps you also kind of build that confidence.
Yeah. And something that I always say is that nobody is thinking about you the way that you're thinking about you. Right? Which is
totally
kind of a two-sided coin where you're like, what do you mean no one's thinking about me? But realistically, nobody is thinking about you the same. They're not looking at your hair the same. They're not looking at what you look like. They haven't looked in the mirror for an hour to decide whether they liked your outfit or not. People aren't thinking about you the same way that you are. And you have to remember that you're allowed to exist and people aren't going to judge you the way that you might think they will.
And it's so easy to get into those spirals. But I also try to remind myself that in the grand scheme of things, and I'm not trying to like be negative about myself, but like, I am not that important, right? Like I'm just one person on this earth, in this solar system, in this universe. And I think when you kind of put it in that perspective, it's like, okay, I'm one person doing one thing and I'm not that important. Like the world's not going to end.
This talk isn't that important. The social media posts, when I get some clap back, it's going to be over in a couple of days. It's not the end of the world.
And of course we should care about our work and all of that stuff. And I know that my type A overachievers are all probably listening to this podcast because they probably follow you. And of course I know all of those things. I am those things, but it's kind of reminding yourself to take that step back and view it from that 40,000 foot lens, as opposed to obsessing over, I said that word wrong, or I messed something up. You know, you can always go back and redo something. And most people don't even notice.
Yeah, and people don't remember what you said. They remember how you made them feel.
Absolutely. So important. And, you know, so important to continue to be kind to people and lift other women up, especially because we don't have to just have one seat at the top. We can make a bigger table, right?
So we talk about confidence in our finances, and often we want to think, proactively. But what happens when something happens and we have to be a little more reactive? Let's talk about a death in the family, a divorce, a major health scare, or maybe an actual health issue. How can we retain our confidence around our finances?
Or a global pandemic. That'll do it too. You know, I think it's always important to try and remind yourself that we cannot see into the future. And so being flexible, I don't talk about budgeting a ton, but, I'm always encourage people to have buffers in their budgets. And I would extend that into their long-term financial plans. Something is probably going to happen. Someone's probably going to lose their job. Someone's going to get sick. Hopefully there's not another global pandemic. But also reminding yourself that it's just one chapter, and these are kind of the cards that we're dealing with right now. And so what choices can we make for the short term to be able to manage that? So again, if you have to pause your retirement contributions or lower them during a time where you're facing a chronic health issue, I think that's okay. And we'll deal with kind of what happens afterwards, but health is number one. I would also argue that if you want to be really proactive, like having proper insurance in place for, critical illness, disability, life insurance, those are all really, really important things to have set up in place so that we can potentially mitigate those challenges that might end up happening to us. Things like an emergency fund, absolutely. But if you're in the situation where it's already happened and you can't go back and change things, I think ruminating about the past is probably the worst thing you can do. So again, we made the best decision we could with the information we had at the time. So now this is the new set of circumstances, and how are we going to manage that? So, are there ways we can save money? Are we okay to scale back certain things in our lives for, again, a short period of time? We don't want to say it's forever. Are there grants or subsidies or help from the government that we can apply for? So I think it's also getting creative in some of those areas as well. But I guess giving yourself the grace that this is, again, one period of time in your life. It's one chapter. It feels so big right now. But when you're looking back 5 years from now, it will be something that is hopefully just a blip on the radar.
Yeah. And divorce at the end of the day is 50. I think it's actually decreasing now. I think it's like 49% of marriages end in divorce. What's the number one piece of financial advice that you have for someone going through a divorce right now?
Probably get a lawyer. But I think as hard as it can sometimes be, and sometimes you want to either just like wash your hands of it and not deal with it, or you want to fight tooth and nail, I think you have to do a little bit of a cost benefit analysis. So if you're going to take someone to court, be prepared that it's probably going to cost $30,000 to $40,000. So are you fighting for more than $30,000 to $40,000? Because if you're not, it might not be worth it. And of course, it's so frustrating and aggravating and stressful and irritating that person might get to walk away with that.
And the emotions when they're
all there. And the emotions
Mm-hmm.
come with it. But we try to keep money as neutral as possible. You can be as angry as you wanted them. But on the other side of it is fighting for something like spousal or child support when you've been a stay-at-home mom or parent, I think is something that is crucial and so important, because in the long term, this is going to impact your earning abilities. So again, I think you have to really kind of cost it out and decide if it's divorce, like what is actually financially worth fighting for, not just because you're mad at the person. And you can be mad at the person. I'm giving you full permission. Go to a rage room, go talk to your therapist, do all the things for your mental health. But I think when it comes to what you're fighting for, you be careful, because it can obviously be very expensive. So we want to make sure it's worth it.
Now, Janine, do you have any questions for me?
I would love to know like how your relationship with your money has kind of changed in, how long we've known each other, and then ultimately also coming to the summit that I put on last year. I would love to know maybe your approach or how you view money has ultimately changed.
Yeah. So this is an interesting thing because I want to talk about my partner as well. We have gone through phases of being the breadwinner for both of us, and watching systematically how I feel when I'm the breadwinner than when he's the breadwinner has been a really interesting thing to like watch. It kind of shows me that like how much we're kind of feeding into the patriarchy. Right now, I own my own business. My husband works full time, and he's more of the breadwinner. And it's been really interesting to watch just how much, especially being at home, translates to real financial money, even though it's not dollars and cents. I'm home a lot more with my kid. It really showcases how like that labor is also so important when we think about overall wealth, and thinking that like mothers who stay at home are also deserving to understand that they're putting a lot of financial burden behind it, even though it's not dollars and cents in front of them. When I came to your summit, I didn't understand what Coastfire was. I had never really been talked to about retirement. And to be honest, I just kind of assumed that I just like never retire. I think there's a lot of people who are just kind of assuming that like that's going to happen. I was never really taught that because I have two parents who are teachers who have the pension. So it was so beautiful to see that like retirement is an actual possibility for me, and to see with compounded interest just how little, I mean, it's still a lot, don't get me wrong, but it's a lot less money than I expected. At 30, what is Coastfire?
Obviously it depends on how much money that you want in retirement and need, but it can be anywhere from, $60,000 to $150,000, kind of depending on your goals. And so if you have that amount by the time you're 30 and you invest it for 35 years, you're set.
Yeah. And I mean, it's still very,
Of
very
course.
hard to get there. But I just had this thing in my head that I had to have millions of dollars already in order to retire.
Yeah, not the case.
And it was really interesting to kind of be able to see that.
I
So
love that.
there's a couple changes of, going from being the breadwinner and making more money to going to a stay-at-home mom and realizing that there's actually a lot of communication that needs to be done in family settings like that. When now it's all of a sudden a family unit, not you against the other person. It's you with the other person.
Yeah.
The communication in a relationship was a really interesting conversation and change that I've seen, as well as realizing that it's a possibility for us.
Oh, I love that.
Yeah.
And I think, you hit on a couple of things. One, I'm so happy your mindset was changed, or maybe the knowledge that you had, so that you understand that it is a possibility for you, and you actually don't need, and I'll use air quotes, like that much. Like, it's not like you, Alyssa, have to save $2 million. It's like, no, make your money work for you. You work so hard. You go to work 40 hours a week. You work so hard to get that money. Let's put it to work and make it work for you.
Yeah. Now, Janine, what is the most important thing?
In what? In life?
You decide. I'm going to keep it open-ended for you.
I think your health is number one. I think having kind of that longevity and being able to be there for your kid ultimately kind of comes down to your health. And I think that obviously can be impacted by your money, right? We're seeing some challenges in our healthcare system in Alberta, and people sometimes are moving to private options, and they're able to do that because they have money. I am not an advocate for a privatization of healthcare. I think it should be available for everyone, but it does paint an example of just how important money can be. But I think your health is number one always, but also getting started, right? Like, again, if you're 45 and you've just come out of a divorce, because I work with a lot of women that maybe left it to their partner to kind of manage the money, and they, have had a divorce or death of a spouse, and they're kind of starting from square one, and they don't know what to do. Again, it's okay. It's not too late. There's no such thing as too late. If we can just get started and learn and educate ourselves, I think, more wealth in women's hands ultimately is better for society.
Yeah. So how can we get in touch with you if we decide that we want some more support with our finances? Your website is JanineRogan.com.
Yeah, I have a few websites, but JanineRogan.com will take you there. And I teach an online investing course for women that has a community aspect. So a place where you can ask those questions that maybe you don't feel confident enough to ask your financial advisor. We have monthly Q&As with myself for office hours, and people come for accountability check-ins. They come to ask questions. It's fantastic. And I also run kind of small group masterminds for women that kind of want to be around women that think kind of like they do, and maybe are challenging what they want their life to ultimately look like. So we do a 6-week program, and we're also launching a 6-month program later this year in 2024. And then I'm all over Instagram with lots of free resources. I try to be on TikTok. I'm not very good at it. And of course, our annual summit, which is in the process of being rebranded, but we're hoping it will be an annual event every March here in Calgary to ultimately create spaces to educate and empower women to invest and build their wealth.
Janine, you are amazing. Thank you so much for coming in. Give me a big hug.
Thank you for having me.
We will see you soon.
Absolutely.
In retirement.
You bet.
Let's go. Disclaimer. This podcast is designed for entertainment purposes only and should not be considered as professional advice. Always consult with relevant experts or professionals for personalized guidance.